Hello people, how you doing? I hope you're having a damn great day. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be breaking down Ajax's current set of instructions and tactics that you can look to implement into your game FC24. Of course, as per always, if you do enjoy videos like this, subscribe. And if you are subscribed already, what are you doing? Please hit that like button. It would go a very, very long way in notifying YouTube that I do a great job. Anyway, so we will be talking about the 4-3-3 system as well as their more attacking structure. Now, there's no actual structural changes to the offensive system, but at the same time, in terms of the tactics and certain player instructions, there are a few things that do change. So stick around for that. So moving on to the formation, now I have made no structural changes to it. It's a 4-3-3 holding, so it's one goalkeeper, two centre-backs, two full-backs, one DM, two central midfielders, one striker, and then of course two wingers. Now moving on to the tactical side of things, and I think the best tactical vision that suits how Ajax play, of course, working the ball into those wider channels, supplying the wingers or the fullbacks in those wide areas, opening up space more essentially for the very rotational type midfield. I think it's wing play, and wing play does get the best out of what the players that Ajax have. So moving on to the defense, the defensive style is set to pressure on heavy touch, keeping their shape, keeping their structure more times than not, and when the opposition make a mistake, the likes of Berghaze or Broby or potentially the likes of Bergwijn, they'll look to try and pounce that, turn the ball over, and then obviously work it up the field for a quick transition attack. As for the team width, I've set it to 45. Now, it can vary and it can range, but I think 45 best replicates and reflects how Ajax's backline tend to set up at times. They don't mind going man 1v1, setting up as a man v man situation, but at the same time, they can be a bit more compact, so that's why I think slightly less than 50, but just more than 40 is the probable best realistic option for them. Moving on to the depth now, I've set it to 60. Now this can also vary, and with the offensive system, the other 4-3-3, you will see it does get a bit higher up in the field, and that helps with the possession stats. But for this, the base, the balanced set of instructions, I think 60 best suits them. They do tend to set up more times than not in a mid-block, and that obviously does protect their backline with the potential counterattacks or the through balls to try and exploit them. Onto the offense, the build-up play I've set is to balanced. Now, in the game that I did see, they were playing quite a few balls over the top between the lines, trying to get those runners in behind the opposition. So that's why I've gone with a balanced approach, because yes, Ajax do try and, play those little short 5-yard passes, string them together in the central areas and then work the ball out wide. But at the same time, they can look to go long. They can look to play from the back. The likes of Hato or Satulo are very good at playing those balls in behind, trying to exploit the opposition with. As for the transgression, I've gone with direct passing. This will encourage your forward to make those runs in behind, trying to exploit the space that the opposition's backline leave in behind. As for the width, I've gone with it set to 75. Now, this also does vary and does range, but at the same time, you want to try and open up as much space more centrally for your midfield to try and get onto, have the time and the space on the ball to try and create for the forwards. So that's why I've gone with a width set to 75. At the same time, you also want your fullbacks and your wingers connecting quite well in those wide areas of the field and having as much time and space in those wider channels to try and operate with. As for the players in the box, I've set it to 8. Now, they do try and overload the offensive area with players in and around the box, so more or less 4 players in and around there. It'll sometimes be one of your number 8s as well as your forwards getting into that attacking third. And then finally, for the corners and the free kicks, as per always, I've set it to 4. Now, taking a look at the instructions, starting off at the back with the goalkeeper, of course, really, here's set to a balanced approach for both saving outside of the box and saving on crosses. I think for the saving on crosses, he's not overly bad or overly good at it, so therefore I think a more balanced approach, it more or less dictates on a situational type thing, so he can choose to come for the ball in certain moments if it is, fired and close to him, or potentially he'll look to try and stay on his line and make the saves, just like with the saving outside of the box. Not really needed for a mid-block set and play, but at the same time, he can definitely be a ball-playing goalkeeper, have a sweeper-type mentality where he does run out of his box. But like I say, because you aren't playing the highest of lines, you don't really require your goalkeeper to have that role. Into your backline now, of course, we've got the likes of Hato and Satulo. They are both set to their base set of instructions. No real changes needed for them. But onto your fullbacks now. Now, obviously, the left-hand side and the right-hand side vary ever so slightly. The likes of Sosa, he'll be told to join the attack, as well as supply a lot of overlapping runs for the likes of Bergwijn, who does look to try and tuck in every now and then. And then finally, for the defensive positioning, I've told him to stick to position. As for the likes of Wrench on the other side, very similar role. You do want him getting high up the field. You do want him being an out there ball in the attack. But at the same time, the run type, I noticed he does, drift inside a little bit more. Does tend to come inside, link up a bit more with the midfield. Sometimes you see him like playing as an inverted winger in certain moments. So you want to try and replicate that role. He does also supply the overlapping runs every now and then. So a run type of mixed helps him replicate and reproduce those specific runs that he tends to make. And then finally, for the defensive positioning, just like with the left-hand side, he is set to stick to position. So now moving on into the midfield, starting off with the DM. So for the defensive behavior of the likes of Tahirovic, I think that's how you pronounce his name, he is set to tight mark. I did see in quite a few games that he was very, zoned in on one particular player, whether it was one of the number 8s or one of the number 10s, or sometimes even just the free man making that run into the box. He'll get nice and tight to him, make sure that that player can't pop off any shots or have any time or space on the ball to try and think or create for anybody else. So that's why tight man mark does help with replicating this role. As for the attacking support, he didn't really get too high up the field. He was looking to try and shield and cover the backline area as much as he possibly could. So to obviously replicate that, I've gone with him to stay back while attacking. And finally, for the interceptions, it's set to normal. You don't really want him being too aggressive, stepping out of position at times, opening up space in between the midfield lines for the opposition to try and exploit, as well as the positioning freedom on the offensive side of things is set to stick to position. Again, not having him do too much drifting wide or being the deep lying playmaker or dropping between the defenders. You don't really need him doing anything of that sort. And then also the defensive role, he's set to cover the sensors. So again, you don't really need him drifting. You'll have your 2 number 8s that can drift into those wider pockets of space, pick up the runners, pick up the men in those areas. So your number 6 essentially is literally just there to try and protect the back line. Into the likes of Taylor now, he's set to having a balanced role, so he can play as a box-to-box type player. I did see him getting into the box a fair amount, which is why for the support on crosses, he is told and instructed, make sure you are getting into the box. And more times than not, he does tend to try and, link up quite high up the field with the likes of Brobby. So you want him in that role, sometimes overlapping Brobby, other times, playing just off of the shoulder of the striker. As for the interceptions, I've gone with it set to aggressive, trying to implement that press, forcing the opposition into mistakes and obviously triggering the quick press on the opposition's failure. As for the defensive positioning, just like what I said with the number 6, he's going to cover the center, but your 2 number 8s, they're going to drift wide into those wider channels, and that exactly is what you want here with the likes of Taylor. For the positioning freedom, I've told him to have that free roam role, so he will pop up in the little half spaces, show for the ball a bit more, offer his support in building up play from the back, as well as going forward. The same can be said for the likes of Van den Boemen, also set to be a bit of a box-to-box player, helping with the build-up play, also getting forward, as well as having a balanced role for getting into the box or not. So he can choose to stay on the edge of the area trying to rotate play, or potentially make his way into that final third and find himself on the end of a few crosses or cutback opportunities. As for the interceptions, just like with Taylor, you want him to be aggressive, chasing that ball down, hounding mistakes out of the opposition, and then obviously looking to try and capitalize on them. And then also the defensive positioning, just like with Taylor, cover the wing and then free roam for the offensive side of things. We make it into the front line now with the likes of Berghuis, a very different role to the captain Bergwijn. So he is set to come back on defense. You want him dropping a bit deeper, and obviously he is the natural playmaker of the side. He is the number 10 that's being shifted out wide onto the right-hand flank. So you want him dropping a bit deeper, allowing him to also get on the ball a bit earlier, linking up a bit more with the midfield in certain moments. The transgression I've gone with is set to stay wide, so he can definitely look to, hug the touchline a bit more. And I did see him, whipping some crosses, shift the ball onto his left foot, whipping crosses from a wider angle. So you kind of want him creating as much space as possible down that right flank, also for the inverted fullback of Wrench in certain moments. The support runs, I've set it to a balanced approach. So yes, he doesn't have a load of pace on him, but yes, he can definitely look to try and exploit the space down the right-hand side. But at the same time, you also want him to have the ability to come short, link up with the midfield in certain moments, or potentially be a bit more of a target man. Now, he isn't the strongest of players, but he can do a very good job in having the ball pinged into him, hold it up, and then lay it off to maybe a Wrench or Van den Boemen, or maybe even the likes of a Brian Brobby. As for the likes of the interceptions, now he doesn't have the most insane work rate, but at the same time, I think he does have a very good, defensive awareness, so that's why I think a normal set of interceptions is set to be on for him. I think it replicates his role on the defensive side of things very well. And then also the support on crosses, I've told him to get into the box for the cross. He can choose to sometimes stay on the edge of the area and create, but at the same time, you want him in and around that attacking third. As for the likes of Bergwijn, now, of course, he's set to have a basic defensive support, so sometimes coming back, other times hanging slightly up the field, being an outlet ball for a potential counter-attack. The transgression is set to free roam. Now, I did see him hovering inside, more of an inside forward than a natural winger trying to create on that left-hand flank. But again, you want him, drifting in that little half space in between what would it be, the right centre-back and the right-back? Or would it be, the right centre-back and the right-back? You want him drifting in that little half space, trying to, pick up the runs in between, having the players in and around and try and supply those balls through the lines or over the top to try and have him exploit the opposition with. As for the support runs, just like with the right-hand side, you want him to be able to obviously use his pace, and he does have a lot more pace than what Berghuis does, but you want him to be able to use that, plus be a a potential target man, or maybe even drop a bit shorter, come a bit closer to the likes of Taylor, be in and around the ball to play more century at times. So you want him to have that role. The interceptions are set to normal, and then finally you want him being able to get into the box, being able to, latch onto those crosses or those free kick opportunities. Sorry, not free kick opportunities, cutback opportunities, and obviously tuck away a few goals. As for the likes of Robbie, now, I did see him drifting into the right-hand channel, the left-hand channel. He is obviously a very physical, strong unit of a man. But sometimes when the opposition are, they're playing their low block, you want him to be able to pull players out of position. And in order to do that, I think the best, instructions that replicate his role is a balanced width, so allowing him to drift, also allowing him to be a bit more central, as well as the ability for him to play as a false nine. There were countless times where he would stand next to the centre back and then realize, okay, he's not going to be able to work his magic. So he would drop off the back line, drop very, very deep, link up with the number 8 or even sometimes the number 6. And then obviously that would in turn pull an opposition player out of position, whether it's one of their DMs or maybe one of their centre backs. And in turn, the likes of Bergwijn or Berghuis, or maybe even one of your number 8s would make that extending run past the striker. So more or less that's what you're trying to replicate with him being a false nine, as well as it allows him to, drop a bit deeper, get on the ball, drive at the opposition. I think it's a very underrated attribute that he has with the ball at his feet, driving down the left-hand channel or the right-hand channel. He does have a very good... he's not Lukaku, that's what I'm trying to say. He does have a very good first touch. He does have the ability to run with the ball quite well. As for the interceptions, I've set it to aggressive, as well as the defensive support, I've set it to basic. So yes, he can choose to come back and help out, or potentially he can look to try and stay higher up the field and link up a bit more on the counter with the likes of Bergwijn. Now, moving on to the offensive structure that I would advise you to only really use up against the lesser teams, the teams that are going to allow you to have the ball as much as possible, the teams that are going to allow you to play a possession-based style of football. So that is my key bit of advice for these instructions. Onto the formation now. It is a 4-3-3 holding. There's no real changes to it, so it's one goalkeeper, 2 centre-backs, 2 full-backs, 1 DM, 2 central midfielders, 2 wingers, and then of course 1 striker. Now moving on to the tactical side of things, there are a few changes to it. So the tactical vision is still set to wing play. The defensive behavior is still set to pressure on heavy touch, with the width still being set to 45. Now the first major change that we do see is the depth. It is set to 75. Now this is more so to try and help in possession of the ball. Of course, like I said earlier, you are looking to use these or this set of instructions and tactics up against the lesser sides. The sides that are going to sit quite deep. The sides that are going to allow you to have the ball, have possession. So in order to try and best those low block type teams, you want to try and push your high line or your back line higher up the field to create that high line, and that will obviously help you in and out of possession. Speaking of possession though, onto the offensive side of things, the build-up play is set to slow build-up, so this will allow your centre-backs to show for the ball a bit more, to build up quite effectively through the final thirds and then progress the ball into that attacking third where you're going to obviously try and score as many goals as possible. As for the transcreation, I've set it to possession. Now that's another major change that we see to the tactical structure and system as well as the setup. You want to try and have those little triangles forming in and around the opposition's box, trying to pull players out of position, keep the ball as long as you possibly can, try and work the best opportunities for your striker. And then onto the width, it's still set to 70, with the players in the box still being set to 8, as well as the corners and the free kicks still being set to 4. Now, looking at the instructions, we will be, breezing over quite a few of these players because they do have more or less the same type of roles. But starting off at the back with the goalkeeper, there is a major change to it. He is said to be a sweeper keeper. Now this does play into the fact that you are playing a slightly higher line, which would require your keeper to be a bit more proactive when in and out of possession, making sure that he is running off of his line for those balls over the top, trying to exploit the high line that your team will be playing. So you need to be very aware and proactive with the goalkeeper doing so. As for your 2 centre-backs, again, no real changes to them, as well as your full-backs. They've got the same set of instructions as the balanced set of tactics. So moving on into your midfield now, of course, the likes of Tahirovic, he's still got the same role and set of instructions to try and replicate his role from before. You don't really need him doing too much, you don't really need him doing anything too differently. But as for the likes of your 2 number 8s, now the first major change that we do see here is obviously Taylor's got his same role, but the first major change that we see here is the likes of Van den Bomen. You want him breaking into the box a bit more, you want him being more proactive with his runs in and around the likes of the striker Robbie. You want him, being a very attacking threat. But at the same time, he can look to try and link up a bit more in that final third. So more or less, having him set to get into the box for the crosses or the cutbacks he can look to try and create when he's in that area, or potentially pop off shots. But other than that, there's no other real changes to it. Now moving on into your forward line, and this is where you start to see a lot of major changes to it. So for the likes of Hayes, we still want him to come back, drop a bit deeper, get on the ball a bit more. But for the chance creation, this is the first, big change for it. It is set to a balance with, so not exactly tugging the touchline and staying wide. He can look to come inside a bit more, he can look to cut inside and pop off shots, or potentially look to be a bit more of a nuisance and have that free roam role popping up in the little half spaces, just like what Bergwijn will also do. But now for the support runs, you want him coming a bit shorter, getting on the ball a bit more, trying to, whip in those little diagonal crosses into either the back post or the middle of the box for either Brobby or Bergwijn, one of your number 8s, making that attacking run. As for the interceptions, it's now set to aggressive, so you want to see a bit more of a work rate from your right-hand side, and obviously him trying to hound and close the ball down, win it back very effectively, and obviously regain possession. And then also you want him to be able to get into the box for the attacking play. As for the likes of Bergwijn, a very similar role to before. You want him to still have a basic defensive support, still have that free roam role, as well as the support run still being set to balance. And it's very important that they are set to balance, because now you're playing a possession-based style of football, so you don't necessarily need your forwards making those runs in behind nearly as much. So you want him to be able to drop a bit shorter or be a bit more of a target man in certain moments and link up a bit more with the players in and around him. As for the interceptions, I've set it to aggressive, and of course he still needs to be making those advanced runs into the attacking third. Now moving on to your striker, of course, Brobby. He has got this is the major change to the entire system, I will say that. And I always think, and it's just my personal opinion, but in order for you to have a successful possession-based brand of football, and especially in FC24, you need to have a physical target man that can have those little balls fired into him, have the ability to hold a play, have the ability to link up play in and around him, have the ability to take certain players out of the game, whether it's the centre backs, the DM, have the physicality needed in order to have a successful rotational attacking option. So for the support runs, you still want him drifting into those wider channels, still having the ability to run and chase those balls over the top, potentially if you do fire them in, but at the same time you want him to still have that physical central role. I've already explained the target player approach. The aggressive interceptions need to be on, as well as the ability for him to have a basic defensive support. So sometimes he can still look to drop a bit deeper, get on the ball, or potentially hang slightly higher up the field. So yes, my people, that is how I would replicate and recreate the Ajax 4-3-3 new current tactical setup in the game FC24. Out of 10, I would probably give the entirety of this system a solid 8. I think an 8 is worthy. It's a very good system to have a backup option potentially as well. I like the possession-based style of football, but you can also switch it in and around to have that more attacking, those runs in behind. I do quite like that shift in the dynamic at times. So especially if you are playing against a low-block team, you can have the ball, you can have a possession-based brand of football. Or if you are playing a team that, is slightly better or maybe equal to, maybe a PSV, for example, you can look to have those attackers of yours making those runs in behind, trying to exploit the opposition's back line. As for always, my dudes, if you don't mind hitting that like button down below, and if you are new to the channel and you like this content, please don't be afraid, subscribe, comment down below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.